Welcome to Junior Techies. My name is Mrs. Ramno. This video I've prepared for the grade 12s to help them with their June exam preparation. In this video, I'll be looking at the Free State June 2022 Paper 1. But before you watch this video, make sure you have the question paper and the memo at hand. Right. Give the correct biological term for each of the following descriptions. Write down the term next to the question number in the answer booklet. 121. The 28-day reproductive cycle that human females undergo. The 28-day reproductive cycle, that of course is the menstrual cycle. 122. The coiled tubular structure that stores sperm, that is the epididymis. Make sure you spell the epididymis correct. 123. The lining of the uterus, which is supplied with blood vessels. A lining of the uterus, that can only be the endometrium lining. 124. The membrane separating the outer ear from the middle ear, that of course is the tympanic membrane. 125. A hormone that causes a decrease in the blood sugar level, that is insulin. 126. The part of the nervous system made up of cranial and spinal nerves, of course that's the peripheral nervous system. 127. The part of the neuron that protects the axon, that's the myelin sheath. 128. A microscopic gap between the end of one neuron and the dendrite of another, that's a synapse. And 129. When the eyes form different images of an object and the brain forms a three-dimensional object, what is that? Binocular vision. And 1 to 10, the collective name for small bones in the ear that amplifies sound vibrations, that's the ossicles. Right, that was not too bad. Let's get down to question 1.3. Indicate whether each of the statements in column 1 applies to A only, B only, both A and B or none of the items in column 2. Write A only, B only, both A and B or none next to the question number in the answer book. 131. What is secreted by the Graafian follicle? Now we know the follicles only secrete estrogen. So your answer of course is B only. Right. 132. The glands that secretes a milky alkaline fluid in the male reproductive system. I know that that's the prostate gland, but can you see? It's none of the options. So what's your answer? None. 133. Extra-embryonic membranes. We know the allantois and the chorion are both extra-embryonic membranes. So your answer is both A and B. And then 134. What are diseases of the central nervous system? It is both multiple sclerosis and Alzheimer's. So that is your question 1.3. 1.4. Study the diagram below. 141. Give a suitable heading for the diagram. Now what you can see in this diagram here is obviously an amniotic egg. Okay. 142. Give the letter and the name of the part that provides nutrition to the embryo. Now, can you see B? That is the part that provides nutrition, and that's the yolk sac. Give the letter and the name of B that prevents dehydration and gives protection. Prevents dehydration and gives protection. So that can obviously only be A, the shell. Right. .5. The diagram below represents a part of the human ear. 151. Give the label for B. So what's B? Can you see B, the shape of that, the structure? It's more oval and A is round. So B is obviously the oval window. Give the function of part A, which is the round window. You can see it's round, absorbs pressure waves or releases pressure from the inner ear. Give the receptors in part C, that's in the semicircular canals, and the vestibule, and it's for 2 marks. So that's how you know it must be both of them, the cristae and the macula. Give the letter of the cochlea. Well, that's easy. That's a D. Name the fluid in the semicircular canals. That fluid inside the bony part is the endolymph. And 152, which part of the ear is represented in the diagram? This, of course, is the inner ear. 2.1. The diagram below represents a female reproductive system. 211. Give the letter of the part where fertilization takes place. Now we know fertilization takes place in the fallopian tube. And here, what's the letter where fertilization takes place? That's A. Give the letter of the part where sperms are introduced. Now we know sperms are introduced in the vagina, and here's the vagina, so your answer is D. Give the letter of the part where the embryo is implanted. The embryo is always implanted in the uterus. So, your only label that it will apply to is obviously C. 212. Explain one adaptation for part A for its function. They're asking you an adaptation of the fallopian tube for its function. So what does the fallopian tube contain? You guys know this. You've learned this in grade 10. Ciliated columnar epithelium that move the zygote to the uterus. It could be the zygote or it will be the embryo to the uterus. Okay. 213. Cancer was detected in this female reproductive system as indicated. A. Will it be possible for this female to get pregnant? Now, she's only picked up the cancer in the one side. So our answer is obviously yes. They ask us definitely explain. So the left ovary, if you look here, is still intact. So it can still produce an ovum, ovulation can still take place, and fertilization can still take place. That's a nice question. 2.1.4. Describe the process of oogenesis straight from the exam guidelines. Make sure you memorize it. Diploid cells in the ovary undergo mitosis to form numerous follicles. At the onset of puberty, under the influence of FSH, one cell inside a follicle enlarges and undergoes meiosis. Of the 4 cells produced, only one survives to form a mature haploid ovum. This cycle occurs monthly. This was a nice question. 2.2. The table below shows the concentration of some sex hormones in the blood of a cow over a period of time. Cows and humans are very similar regarding the role of reproductive hormones. Study the information below. So in your table, you have the hormone concentration in the blood in arbitrary units. You have the time in days, progesterone, estrogen, and LH concentrations. 221. Determine the length of the cow's progesterone cycle and explain your answer. Now, there's only one way for us to look at this answer, and that's to look at progesterone. Can you see progesterone levels there begin at day 0 at 1, and then day 20 it goes back to 1. So that's the reason it took 20 days. It started off at 1 at the start, and then 20 days it took for it to get back to that level again. So that's how we know it's 20 days. 2.2. Explain how the high concentration of LH on day 20, which is here, will cause an increase in progesterone levels in the days to follow. That's easy. When LH reaches the ovary, what does it do? It stimulates ovulation. After ovulation, what happens to the Graafian follicle? It changes into a corpus luteum, and the corpus luteum will produce progesterone. 223. Progesterone is responsible for the growth of the lining of the uterus and the development of its blood supply. Explain how the figures for this hormone will differ from those in the table if the cow had become pregnant. Now, what happens if the cow is pregnant? The progesterone levels will be very, very high. Why? To make the endometrium more thicker, more vascular, more glandular, for the placenta to form during pregnancy. Yes. Here the memo says to maintain the endometrium. My answer is a bit more specific. 224. The concentration of progesterone in milk can be measured and gives a very early indication if the cow is pregnant or not. How does the progesterone end up in the milk? Of course, what happens to the hormones? They also diffuse into the milk. That's 1 mark. B. If the cow is not pregnant, why does the progesterone levels in the blood drop after a few days? Why? Because what happens to the corpus luteum? It will degenerate. It will stop producing progesterone, and that's why the progesterone levels will drop. Thus, grade 12 was a very nice question. Right. 2.3. The diagram below represents a human fetus and a placenta. 231. Identify part A. Now, part A, you all know that is the umbilical cord. 232. Tabulate 2 differences between the substances transported in the veins and the artery in structure A. So the A, you're talking about the umbilical vein and the umbilical artery. Now, the umbilical vein we know carries oxygenated blood. The umbilical artery we know carries deoxygenated blood. The umbilical vein carries nutrition, and the umbilical artery will carry waste. Make sure you know how to draw a table because you get a mark for the table. So make sure you have your rows and your columns. 233. State two functions of the placenta. Here you could have said provides nutrition for the embryo, plays a role in excretion, gases exchange, acts as a microfilter, and plays a role as an endocrine function. Right. 2.4. Mammals such as a giraffe shows a high degree of parental care. The young develop in the uterus when they are protected and provided with nutrients and oxygen. Newly born giraffes are fed with milk, taught to walk and are protected against predators until they function independently. 241. Explain what is meant by parental care. Now, what is parental care? When parents spend time and energy and care on feeding, protecting, help with temperature regulation of their offspring. 242. Name the type of development strategy shown by giraffes. Definitely, this is obviously precocial development. Now, give 3 reasons for your answer that you mentioned in 242. Right, the eyes open directly after birth. So here in this picture, can you see the eyes are open directly after birth? They are covered in hair. They are immediately active. They can regulate their own body temperature. They can feed themselves and drink the mother's blood, and they can protect themselves for camouflage. Grade 12, this is also a very nice question. 2.5. The diagram below shows a section through the human brain. 251. Give the collective name of the membranes that protect the brain and the spinal cord. We know that this is the meninges. The membrane also accepts the word cerebral membranes. 252. Identify part B. This is part B. That, of course, is the corpus callosum. Identify part D. That, of course, is the spinal cord. The memo also accepts meninges. Identify part F. Look carefully. It's a small pea-sized gland. That's the pituitary gland. Right, 253. Give 2 functions of part A. A is the cerebrum, so the cerebrum controls voluntary actions, interprets impulses from sense organs such as sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, controls your higher mental functions such as memory, intelligence, imagination, emotions, planning, thought, and power judgment. Then, 254. Explain why damage to part E, which is the medulla oblongata, can lead to immediate death. The medulla oblongata controls heartbeat and breathing. If these processes stop, what will happen? Breathing would also stop, and the person will die. Then, 255. Make a label drawing of a neuron that carries impulses from part A to the muscles. That obviously is the motor neuron. Here, if you look at the labels, you have to have the dendrites, cell body with the nucleus, myelin sheet, axon, and terminal end plates. You got a mark for the correct drawing, correct heading, and any 2 correct labels. Right, 3.1. The diagram below shows structures in the human eye. 3.1. Identify the visual defect that is represented by A. Now, with A, can you see the image is falling behind the retina? So that can be long-sightedness or hypermetropia. Identify the visual defect that's represented by part B. There you can see the image falls in front of the retina, and so that could be short-sightedness or myopia. 312. Give the letter only of the diagram that represents the eye in bright light. So, bright light. Your answer here in bright light will be obviously C, because in bright light the pupil constricts to let less light in. Give the letter only of the diagram that represents B when looking at an object less than 6 meters away. Less than 6 meters away, of course, near vision, the lens is more convex. So your answer is F. Give the letter only of the diagram that represents the eye that can be corrected with the concave lens. Of course, short-sightedness or myopia can be corrected with the concave lens. 313. Explain the process that is responsible for the eye mentioned in 312. So they are talking about in 312B. Less than 6 meters away, so they're talking about near vision. So what will happen? The ciliary muscles contract, the suspensory ligaments slacken, tension on the lens decreases, the lens will become more convex, the light rays are refracted more, and the light rays are focused onto the retina. Make sure you write this down, and when you ask this, you can always regurgitate it, memorize it, regurgitate, give it back to the examiners. Right, 3.2. Study the diagram below of a section through the human spinal cord and the neurons involved in a reflex arc. 3.2.1. Identify part C. What is part C? Part C is pointing to this neuron here that I'm just going over in red. And it's found in the spinal cord. So that, of course, is the interneuron or the connector neuron. Identify part E. Part E, can you see it has the lines in it? So that definitely is a muscle. And that, of course, you can either say muscle or effector. 3.2.2. State one function of part B. Now, let's go back and look carefully at what B is. B is pointing to that gap between the two neurons. So that is, of course, a synapse. And what does a synapse do? Ensures the impulse travels in one direction only. 3.2.2b. State one function of part C. Part C, of course, is the connector neuron. What's the function? Transmits impulse from the sensory to the motor neuron. 3.2.3. Explain why the brain is not involved in the reflex action that will follow the reflex arc above. Now, the spinal cord shortens the reaction time by sending the impulse directly to the effector. If the brain was involved, the brain will delay the reaction, causing injury, death, or even harm to the organism. Very nice question. Write that down, grade 12s. 3.2.4. Explain what the effect will be on the reflex arc and reflexes of a person suffering from multiple sclerosis. Wow, even lovelier question. The myelin sheaths are damaged. This will slow down the transmission of the impulse and it will slow down the reaction time. Right. 3.3. The thyroid gland is an endocrine gland. As you can see, it's spelled incorrectly. It's an endocrine gland situated across the trachea below the larynx. Thyroxine is secreted by the thyroid gland and controls the metabolic rate. The pituitary gland controls the production of thyroxine by means of a negative feedback mechanism. 3.3.1. Give the definition of an endocrine gland. So, what is an endocrine gland? It's a gland that does not have a duct, or we call them ductless glands. 3.3.2. Explain how a negative feedback mechanism controls the production of thyroxine when its levels are low in the human body. So, when the thyroxine levels are low, what happens? The pituitary gland is stimulated to secrete more thyroid stimulating hormone, which will then stimulate the thyroid gland to secrete more thyroxine. 3.4. The diagram below illustrates a part of the endocrine system which consists of hormones secreted by glands and their target organs. 3.4.1. Identify each of the following. What is gland A? Gland A, you can definitely see, is the pituitary gland or hypophysis. What is hormone C? Hormone C, produced by the adrenal gland and acts on the kidney here, of course, aldosterone. Hormone D, produced by the pituitary gland and acts on the kidney, ADH. And then D, the substance in the blood that is regulated by hormone C. Okay, that's aldosterone. And hormone C regulates salt or sodium. 3.4.2. Name 3 characteristics of hormone D. Hormone D. So hormone D, secreted by the pituitary gland. Of course, this hormone is ADH. It's a chemical messenger. It's secreted in small amounts, transported via the blood, and its target organ is the kidney. Nice question also. 3.4.3. Explain 3 sympathetic reactions of adrenaline on the human body during an emergency. So what will sympathetic usually increase? So what will happen? The heart rate will be increased to transport oxygen and glucose to the skeletal muscles. Say it said explain. The diameter of the pupil will be increased to allow more light to enter, so a clear image forms. The breathing rate or the bronchioles will dilate, so more oxygen is absorbed for faster cell respiration to release more energy. There will be an increased production to cool the body during the activity. And there will be an acceleration of the conversion of glycogen to glucose for more glucose produced for cell respiration for energy. This is also a very lovely question. Remember, with sympathetic, can you see everything is increased? All the functions are increased. That's the function of the sympathetic reactions. 3.5. An investigation was done to compare the reflex actions in newborn babies with premature babies, early born and not carried to full term. A newborn baby's chance of survival is evaluated by a doctor and scored on an ABCA scale. The heart rate, breathing, muscle tone, color, and reflexes are used as a criteria for this test. The following reflexes are tested: the palm grasp, the sucking and swallowing, the moving the head in the direction of a touch on the cheek, and the walk reflex, walking movements made by the legs of the baby. Data from 1,500 babies were collected over 2 years, and the results are shown in the table. So in the table, you can see the gestation period in weeks, the number of babies, the average palm grasp reflex time in seconds, and the average ABCA score out of 10. 351. What are you measuring? You are measuring, identify 351, identify the independent variable for this investigation. Right, independent variable is what you're controlling. So what are you controlling in this experiment here? You are controlling the gestation period. Now, how do we know it's the gestation period? Here is your dependent variables: the number of babies, the average palm grasp, the average ABCA, and what are you controlling? You chose to do the experiment in this period of during this time of gestation. Right. 352. Explain the significance of a reflex action. Okay, that's quite simple. What do reflex actions do? Protects the body from injuries or harm. 353. From the data and information above, draw a conclusion about the average palm grasp and reflex time. So can you see, the longer the gestation period, right, the faster the palm grasp reflex, or the shorter the reflex time, as you can see that. Right. There is another option in the memo: the shorter the gestation period, right, the slower the palm grasp reflex, or the longer the reflex time. Or you can have it both options. And then the last thing is 354. Draw a histogram to represent the average ABCA score of babies with gestation periods from between 28 and 37 weeks. That I've put on the next page. So here you have your average ABCA score out of 10, gestation period in weeks. Your heading is the average ABCA score of babies with gestation periods between 28 and 37 weeks. And then there's your histogram, no spaces, and you have the weeks below. You got a mark for the correct type of graph, the correct caption, the correct labels on the X and the Y axis, the correct scale. The bars are the same width, and there's no spaces, and all 3 bars were plotted correctly. That was a very nice paper with some very challenging questions that will definitely help prepare you for your exams. And I hope you learned a lot. Thank you for watching this video. Join me and watch all my other videos as well.